Before we get into today's book haul, I just wanted to call out that a lot of the hardcovers I picked up recently were on sale at Barnes& and Noble for buy one, get one 50% off. This is not a sponsored or promotional video at all. Although Barnes& and Noble, if you are watching this for some reason, hit me up. I will talk about your stuff for money. But mainly wanted to call this out for fellow fantasy and sci-fi lovers who like the big, heavy, hardcover books that are kind of expensive. Check that out. I also got some manga that's really expensive normally, and so getting several of those half off was pretty nice for my wallet. So I think that sale goes till July 18th of 2022. Check it out if you have a Barnes and Noble near you, and assuming you're watching this before that time passes. Otherwise, let's get into the book haul. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I bought a lot of books in the past month or two. I generally buy too many books. And if I decided it'd be fun to just make a video where I walk through things I've purchased in the past, we're going to say month or two. This is not a singular book haul, but I wanted to walk through some of the books I bought and I'm excited about. And if you've read any of these or are thinking about reading any of these books, if you've heard good things, if you've heard bad things, I'd love to hear all of that. Let me know. First thing I picked up is a book called The Ember Blade. This is an interesting book. It's a fantasy book. It's by Chris Wooding. What's interesting to me about this book is that I hadn't really heard about it. So I'm pretty plugged into the internet like anybody else. And I have a pretty good sense of what's popular or even mildly popular. So the fact that I didn't know about this was kind of compelling. Something about the cover, the back synopsis, and the first few pages was enough to hook me. And sometimes it's fun to pick up a book you know nothing about. I was at a bookstore a few hours from home, so it's kind of like a weekend trip. And I like to pick up books that I don't really know about when I'm away from home. There's something about it that feels like I'm discovering something. So that's what I did here. And I'm glad I did. I'm about 350 pages into this, and I'm really impressed with the overall quality of this story. I kind of expected it to be a somewhat average fantasy read. The cover, it's nice artwork, but it's a touch generic, right? Like it looks good, but it's a bit generic. And the cover quotes are things like Lord of the Rings for the modern age, or everything I could possibly want in a fantasy novel. That all sounds great, but I never really trust those blurbs because they all say the same thing. It's always Game of Thrones meets whatever other comparison they might have. But something about it was compelling, and I've found the characters, as I've read through a decent chunk of the story, are layered and nuanced and interesting. The plot has been somewhat surprising and fun. It takes a lot of elements from like classic fantasy stories that I love, but it's kind of mixed them together in a really refreshing way. So I'm loving the Emberblade. I'll probably do a video reviewing it in detail once I finish it, but I highly recommend checking it out. Next up, V.E. Schwab's Gallant. So V.E. Schwab, I really enjoyed Vicious. I liked the first Shades of Magic book. I actually didn't love it, which I feel like is somewhat unpopular of an opinion. I think a lot of people love that book. I enjoyed it. It was pretty good. Overall, I like her writing a lot though. And this seemed interesting. The kind of premise for this book is a young girl whose mom seemingly has disappeared, or she's an orphan maybe. It's not clear. I haven't read it yet. She wants to know more about her mother, who left her this journal. And the journal talks about the home she grew up in, a place called Gallant. And it seems to be kind of like this old spooky house, boarding school type vibes. And the main character goes to this house, and lo and behold, there's a connection to a fantasy world. It kind of feels like a Narnia-esque vibe too, where you go into a secret world of fantasy connected to a house. I don't know if that's exactly what this will end up being, but that's kind of the vibes the synopsis gave me. And V. Schwab's a great writer, so I picked this up. It's kind of a squat little book, like feels like a coffee table book. It's very square. So I'm not sure what the purpose of that is. And whoa, hey, I just opened this up and found this. We welcome you to Gallant. That's pretty cool. It's a sticker, I think. I'll probably just use it as a bookmark, but well, that was surprising and delightful. Yeah, so Gallant, check that out. Another fantasy book I picked up recently is Guy Gavriel Kay's All the Seas of the World. I like Guy Gavriel Kay a lot. I've read a few of his books. He's a beautiful writer. He has some of the better prose in the genre, I think. And I enjoy poetic prose. I don't need it. Like some of my favorite authors are not at all lyrical type people. Brandon Sanderson, someone I love. He's a very straightforward writer. Jim Butcher, but I do enjoy beautiful writing. Guy Gavriel Kay is one of the best in fantasy. I believe All the Seas of the World is another novel in the same portion of his fantasy world that his last novel, A Brightness Long Ago, took place in. And I really enjoyed A Brightness Long Ago. So I don't know when I'm actually going to read this, but I knew I would want to at some point. So I picked it up. So next, let's transition from fantasy into horror. So I like fantasy, sci-fi, horror, a whole mix of things. And I don't know what it is, but I feel like the TikTok algorithm has pulled me down a rabbit hole of horror and thriller novels lately. And I guess I'm just in a place where I want to be devastated emotionally. Life is stressful and the world is terrifying, and so I thought, what better way to handle that than devastate myself emotionally with horrifying books. So uh, I picked up a couple of books by an author called Nick Cutter, who I think is pretty popular. I'm not as plugged into the horror and thriller scene as I am fantasy and sci-fi, but I actually found out about Nick Cutter because he's written a book called The Deep. And the premise of The Deep is there's some kind of huge pandemic happening that's ravaging the world. Scientists have created a lab miles under the ocean to do some kind of research that's necessary for some reason underwater. I don't know the whole premise, but that mix sounds compelling. I really am a fan of deep sea horror. I read a book a couple of years ago, and I'm forgetting what it's called. I'll put the picture up on the screen. It's by Mira Grant, and the premise is kind of a deep sea horror where they find evidence of mermaids, and they have to go super deep, like into the Mariana Trench, and the mermaids are much more horrible than than the ones we're used to from like Disney. And that was a really fun book. I recommend that, by the way. Go check that out. But anyway, The Deep kind of had some of those vibes, and I thought that sounds fun. So I went to my local bookstore to pick that up, and they didn't have it. So I don't have that book. That's not part of the book haul. So not sure why I'm talking so at length about it. But I did find another book by Nick Cutter called The Troop. The premise of The Troop is basically a bunch of like Boy Scouts with their scoutmaster are on some expedition. They're on an island somewhere in Canada, and they're doing their Boy Scout thing. And one night when they're all around the fire, a stranger wanders up to them, and he's gaunt and feverish, and something seems off about him, and he's voraciously hungry. And kind of the implication from the synopsis is that there's some type of pathogen or sickness that he that is spreading that causes people to become so insanely hungry that they just eat anything and everything. It feels like a cool mix of weird cannibal-esque stuff mixed with, I don't know, Lord of the Flies meets a cannibal pandemic type thing. It sounds horrible. And I think it will it will ruin my day. I get grossed out easily, so I can't wait to mess myself up with that. The other Nick Cutter book I picked up is called Little Heaven. The premise of this book is a woman's sibling or someone very close to her went away to this settlement in New Mexico called Little Heaven, a small town kind of in the middle of nowhere. She's concerned about them. She hires 3 mercenary type people to go find this person, presumably bring them back safely, or at least make sure that they're okay. This kind of feels like it has cult vibes, like this person's drawn into a creepy cult in New Mexico, which sounds interesting. Always good, down for a good cult story. I found I really like New Mexico as a setting for some reason. Maybe it's because of Breaking Bad. And more recently, I've watched Better Call Saul, which is pretty great. All of that is in New Mexico. Something about that is a great place for a horror thriller that's based in the real world. I don't know why for me, but I'm excited about that. So those are the 2 Nick Cutter books I picked up. I'll eventually pick up The Deep, which was the one I initially was excited about. But yeah, you'll have to let me know if you've read any Nick Cutter. I'd love to hear about it. Another horrifying book I have picked up is Brother by Anya Alborn. This is something I've heard about both on TikTok and on, I guess not so much YouTube, TikTok and Book Reviews Kill podcast, which is awesome. Check them out. So this book takes place in the Appalachian Mountains, and it's based off of this family that I don't know if they capture people and keep them. Something creepy and horrible is going on in this very rural area of the Appalachian Mountains, and it sounds like one of the family members, Michael Morrow, maybe doesn't fit in with the rest of his family, who sound like there's something wrong with them. He eventually meets a pretty girl in a small nearby town, and he becomes smitten with her. And it seems like it's kind of the story of this young man who is part of a horrible family who does horrible things, who wants to change and become something different, and the struggle that he then encounters. So This sounds like it's gonna wreck me. That's kind of what I've what I've heard from TikTok. So, Brother by Anya Alborn. I'm excited. She has a lot of other books that people have been recommending, so I plan to start going through her books. Next up, Sea of Tranquility. This is by Emily St. John Mandel. She wrote a book called Station 11, which is pretty popular at this point. They made a TV show on, I can't remember if it was Apple TV or HBO, but there's a TV show of it that I've heard mixed things about. But the book Station 11 is fantastic. I read it at the beginning of this year. And this is her next novel. She's a very poetic writer. Her books tend to carry a strong emotional punch in my experience. And this is the next book that seems to be taking place between Earth and a colony on the moon, and which is where A Sea of Tranquility comes in, I suppose. So I'm kind of interested to see, like, is this I don't know if this will be as much of a dystopian novel as Station 11 is, or if it's more of a drama. But I'm excited to check this out. You'll have to let me know if you've read it. Also, for anyone who goes to Barnes and Noble, for the week I'm uploading this video, I believe it ends July 18th of 2022. They have a buy one get one 50% off sale for all hardcover books. I'll touch on that again with some other hardcovers I purchased. But again, if you like hardcover books and you want to buy a handful of them, now's the time. The last creepy book that I picked up is a book called Labvona by Atessa Mosfeg. This was another one I found on TikTok. This sounds like it's kind of like a 16 or 1700s village, kind of old England type settings. And they are struggling with natural disasters and I think famines. And it's just kind of just a story taking place in like the 1600s is enough for it to just be a horror novel, which is sad, but kind of feels true. But I think there's also a dynamic with the Lord Governor who is ruling over this village, who is abusive towards the people who live here. And so I think it's kind of the struggles day to day of living there, people who are looking for hope and guidance and spiritual guidance from their priest and from the governor, and who are kind of taken advantage of. So sounds like this is a bit of a depressing read, which again seems like I'm in the mood for. And the cover is weird, but I kind of like it. It's very minimal, and something about it is compelling. It feels like this has kind of A24 vibes to it, like an A24 movie. Kind of feels like that. So that's why I picked it up. All right, so that gets us through the creepy books. I have one sci-fi book that I've picked up recently, and that is the second book in the Expanse series, Caliban's War by James S.A. Corey, which is two different authors working together under that pen name. I read Leviathan Wakes a few years ago, and I'm in the process of rereading it. I'm doing a reread with my dad, who started these books. And now that all 9 books are out, I really want to get through the series. I've heard amazing things. So I picked up the second book there. Okay, so that's all of the books that I picked up. I also picked up 2 manga. I mentioned earlier, Barnes & Noble is doing a buy one, get one 50% off, depending on when you watch this. But up to July 18th, I believe, of 2022. Go online and double check that. But they're doing buy one, get one 50% off for every hardcover. I started reading Berserk this year. Now, the Berserk tomes are huge, right? And each one of them is $50, which is a lot. And there's over 10 of them. I don't know exactly how many there are, but I bought the first I bought the first 3 over the past year or so. And I kind of buy them one off here and there because they're so expensive. And so I've spent $150 on those 3 volumes. I've heard it's worth it. What I've read so far is pretty impressive. But because they're doing this deal, $25 off essentially for buy one, get one half off. So I got volume 4 of Kentaro Miura's Berserk, and I got volume 5. So I now have the first 5 volumes of Berserk. This still has the parental advisory sticker that I forgot to take off. So, Mom, I hope you're not watching this. But these are pretty graphic manga. They're very violent. I think there might be some other adult content as well. They're incredible. The artwork is fantastic. I've heard great things about the story and the growth of the characters over time. I'm excited to read through it. These are all the rage on YouTube and Book Talk. So I'm sure anybody who's listening to this has some awareness of Berserk. But I'm excited to read it. I have, again, the first 3. And so instead of spending $100 on these 4 and 5, I spent $74. So yeah, if you want to get some hardcovers, now is the time to do it. Anyway, thanks for hanging out. Those are the books I've picked up over the past 2 months or so. I'm excited to read them. The way my TBR works is that it is utter chaos with no real sense of discipline. So I'm not necessarily going to be reading these all in the order that I purchased them. I have other books on my TBR and on my bookshelves that I want to get to as well. So who knows what I'll be reading and when. Right now, like I mentioned, I'm reading The Ember Blade. Plan to finish that up, and then I'll probably hop into one of these thrillers, either by Nick Cutter or Anya Alborn. So stick around. I'll upload some videos on reading updates relatively soon. But yeah, I would love to hear from you guys. If you have read any of these books, or if you have opinions of any of these books, you're excited about them, not excited about them, let me know. Drop in the comments. And thanks for watching.